The silence in the apartment was suffocating, but it was the kind of silence I had come to expect over the years. Not the comforting kind, the kind that signals peace or contentment. No, this was the silence that hung in the air like an unspoken truth, thick and unyielding. I stood at the kitchen counter, absent-mindedly stirring my coffee, the dark liquid swirling in the white mug, as the New York skyline stretched out beyond the window, a reminder of the life I had built, successful, independent, untouchable. Or so I had thought. It had been months since I'd started feeling the change in the air. It was subtle at first, like a crack in a glass that grows imperceptibly wider over time. Rick, my husband of 15 years, had been different. The late nights at the office turned into late nights at client dinners. The cell phone he used to leave lying around now found its way into his pocket as if it were his most prized possession. I wasn't the type of woman to snoop. I wasn't needy, desperate for his attention or validation. I didn't need to go through his things, but somehow, instinctively, I knew something was wrong. I set my coffee down and glanced at the clock. It was 8:45 p.m. Rick should have been home by now. Another late night. Another excuse. I could feel my pulse quicken, that familiar twinge of frustration bubbling up from somewhere deep within me. But still, I waited. Maybe it was nothing I told myself. Maybe he had just been caught up in work. After all, he was good at his job. He was brilliant smooth, the kind of man who could sell ice to an Eskimo. And I had built a career of my own, worked my fingers to the bone, to make a name for myself as one of the top architects in New York. I didn't need Rick to validate my success. But then the small things started to add up. I'd found an unfamiliar perfume on his shirt one evening, a floral, heady scent that I'd never smelled before. It didn't belong to me. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the ones where he stepped into the other room to talk his voice, dropping to a murmur too low for me to overhear. I wasn't a fool. I knew better than to ask him about it. He'd deny it. He'd say I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. And I would believe him. So I stopped asking. I started observing. I became the silent witness to the slow unraveling of something I had once thought unbreakable. That night, after another long, fruitless wait, I heard the sound of the front door opening. Rick's shoes clicked on the hardwood floor, his steps heavy with exhaustion. He didn't even look at me as he walked in, barely acknowledging my presence, as he dropped his briefcase by the door and tossed his jacket over the back of the chair. He was so casual, so unaware of the hurricane building inside of me. He hadn't even changed out of his work clothes. His shirt was rumpled, his tie loosened, and there was something in the way he moved that made him seem even more distant than usual. It wasn't just his body language. It was his eyes, those cold, distant eyes that had once looked at me with warmth and affection, now hollow and guarded, as if I were a stranger. He went straight to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water, twisting the cap open with an absent flick of his wrist. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I watched him, as if something inside me knew that the moment of reckoning was here. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. What was there to say? "Are you cheating on me?" was too blunt, too raw, and I didn't have the strength to ask it. Not yet. Dinner's in the fridge, I said instead, my voice coming out colder than I intended. He glanced at me for a fraction of a second, his lips curving into a half-hearted smile. "Thanks. I'm not hungry right now," he muttered, already turning away from me. There was something in the way he said it, in the way he avoided eye contact, that made my stomach churn. His voice had changed. It was as if he wasn't even speaking to me anymore, just a ghost in the same room. I watched him as he sank onto the couch, pulling out his phone, his thumb moving across the screen with practiced ease. I felt an irrational surge of jealousy, not just because of the phone itself, but because of how unreachable he had become. The man I married, the man I had once laughed with until we both cried, had disappeared into some faceless stranger, and I was left picking up the pieces of a marriage I no longer recognized. And then I saw it. the gleam of something caught in the corner of my eye. His briefcase. He'd left it open, the latch unclicked, the flap hanging loosely. I didn't know what compelled me to do it. Maybe it was the years of intuition, the little voice inside my head telling me to trust my instincts. Or maybe it was the desperation that had been creeping up on me for weeks now. Either way, I couldn't stop myself. I stood up, my legs stiff, my heart pounding in my ears, and made my way to his briefcase. It was a move that would change everything. I reached into the bag, my fingers trembling. A file folder. I pulled it out, flicking through the pages, barely registering the words. My eyes stopped when I saw it, a receipt. Not for a business lunch, not for a client meeting, but for a hotel. A 5-star hotel, one I had never been to, dated for the previous week. A single name was written on the line under guest, Hannah Shaw. The world tilted. My vision blurred, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The name was unfamiliar. I didn't know who she was, but the weight of the evidence settled on me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a random dinner with a client. This was a lie. This was betrayal. My marriage was unraveling before my eyes, and I had been blind to it for so long. I stood there frozen, the receipt crinkling in my hands. I felt the overwhelming rush of emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief, all crashing over me in a tidal wave. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a numbness creep into my chest, as if my heart had been carved out of me. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved, with every ounce of my being, was not the person I thought he was. He was a stranger. "Who is she, Rick?" I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Rick didn't even look up. His fingers continued to slide across the screen of his phone. "It's nothing, Kat, just a work thing." "Don't worry about it," he replied, his voice casual, almost dismissive. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just going to stand by and watch this happen. I was going to fight. I was going to take back everything he thought he could steal from me, my trust, my love, my dignity. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blurring into the next in a haze of disbelief and quiet determination. I couldn't shake the image of that hotel receipt from my mind. The name Hannah Shaw echoed in my head, a dull hum that seemed to grow louder with every passing hour. Who was she? Why was she staying at a hotel with Rick? And why didn't he think I'd ever find out I had learned enough about Rick to know that he was meticulous, always covering his tracks, but that made him all the more dangerous? For years, I had admired his intelligence, the way he could manipulate a room with his charm, the way he seemed to always be in control. But now, all of that felt like a mask, a well-crafted illusion hiding something much darker. And I had been the fool standing in the wings, believing in a marriage that was nothing more than a lie. I was angry, not just at Rick, but at myself. How had I let it go on this long without questioning it? How had I let myself become so blind to the cracks in our relationship? I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, to see the truth behind the surface. Yet here I was, caught in the web of a man who had never truly cared about me, not in the way I thought he did. The realization stung, but it also fueled a fire within me. A fire I hadn't known was there. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a complete and utter violation of everything I had worked, for everything I had believed in. My marriage wasn't just a commitment between two people. It was a partnership, a union built on trust, mutual respect, and love. And Rick had broken it all. I didn't confront him immediately. No, I wasn't stupid enough to walk in and confront him without knowing more. I needed evidence more than what I had already found. The receipt and the name Hannah Shaw were clues, but I needed the truth. I needed to know exactly what I was up against before I made my move. And if there was one thing I'd learned about Rick over the years, it was that he was not someone you confronted on impulse. He was clever, calculated, And if I was going to expose him, I needed to be just as clever. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't something I'd ever thought I would do, but I wasn't about to let Rick get away with this. Not after everything we'd built together. Not after all the years of sacrifices, compromises, and dreams that we had shared. And not after I had trusted him with everything I had. His betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of the life we had created, of everything I had worked for. It was a slap in the face. The investigator was discreet, professional, and quiet. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I didn't anticipate the anxiety that gripped me the moment I handed over the hotel receipt and the scant details I knew about Hannah Shaw. It was strange, the sense of powerlessness I felt. Despite being the one who was doing the investigating, I had always been in control of my career, my life, my relationship with Rick. But now it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the ground beneath me would give way. For the next few days, I did my best to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, focusing on an upcoming project that had the potential to launch my career to new heights. I was used to long hours, endless meetings, and constant pressure. But the weight of what I was going through made every task feel insignificant. How could I focus on work when my entire world was falling apart? Then the investigator's report came. I was sitting in my office staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city when I heard my phone buzz. It was a message from him: "I have what you need. Meet me at 5. I didn't hesitate. I closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and left. The air outside was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that made you wish for a warm sweater. But I didn't feel the cold. I was too consumed with what was coming next. When I arrived at the small cafe downtown, the investigator was already there, sitting in the corner with a coffee in front of him. His expression was impassive as always. He didn't offer a smile or a greeting. Instead, he slid a thick folder across the table towards me, his gaze never leaving mine. "Everything you need is in there," he said, quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I opened the folder, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside were photos, dozens of them, each one showing Rick with Hannah Shaw. The first photo was innocuous enough, just the two of them sitting at a restaurant, laughing, talking. But the next few photos told a different story. There was one of them walking through a hotel lobby, hands brushing against each other in a way that felt too intimate, too familiar. And then there was one of them leaving a hotel room, Rick's arm casually draped around Hannah's shoulders. They didn't look like business partners. They looked like lovers. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as I flipped through the photos. This wasn't just an affair. This was something deeper, something darker. It wasn't a simple fling. It was an emotional connection, a bond that Rick had built with someone else while I had been left in the dark. There were also documents in the folder, hotel reservations, credit card statements, text messages between Rick and Hannah, some of them flirtatious, others far more explicit. My stomach churned as I read through them. Rick had been lying to me for months, and not just about the affair. He'd lied about everything. His business trips had been nothing more than a cover. He had been seeing Hannah every chance he got, and I had been too blind to see it. I sat there in silence, the weight of the evidence settling over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust. This was a complete and utter destruction of the life I had thought I was building with Rick. I had given him everything, my love, my loyalty, my heart, and he had used it to build something else, something hidden in the shadows. I didn't know how long I sat there staring at the photos and documents. I didn't know how long I had been holding my breath. Finally, I looked up at the investigator. "I want you to keep following them," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. "I need to know everything. No detail is too small. I want them exposed. I want them to know that I know." The investigator nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll keep you updated," he said simply, standing up to leave. I sat there for a moment longer, my hands trembling as I reached for my coffee. It tasted bitter in my mouth, the warmth of the cup doing nothing to soothe the cold that had settled deep in my bones. I had what I needed, the truth. And yet it felt like nothing had changed. The truth didn't make the pain go away. It didn't erase the hurt, the disappointment, the rage that was building inside me. All it did was confirm what I already knew. Rick had betrayed me. He had taken everything I had given him and thrown it away. But I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him take any more from me. I had worked too hard, fought too long to lose it all to a man who had never truly cared about me. I left the cafe with a new sense of purpose. The path ahead was clear. I was going to take back control of my life. I was going to expose Rick for the man he truly was. And I was going to make sure that nothing would ever break me again. I spent the following days in a sort of quiet storm, a strange mixture of calm determination and seething anger. The investigation had given me the answers I'd needed, but they hadn't brought me peace. Nothing could. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the photographs of Rick and Hannah, their closeness, their intimacy. I couldn't get the image of them together out of my mind, and the sting of betrayal wrapped itself around my chest, constricting with each breath. But I knew I couldn't let myself be consumed by it. Not yet. Not until I had control of the situation, until I had taken everything from him, everything he thought he could take from me. I spent hours in the city, walking the streets, aimlessly trying to push the images out of my head. The noise of New York City was deafening, but in a strange way, it was a relief. I liked the anonymity of the crowd, the way no one knew my pain. I could blend in, disappear, pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't live like this, unable to shake the feeling that I was walking around with a mask on. I had to act. I had to confront him. The plan started to take shape in my mind over the course of those few days. I didn't want to simply confront Rick. I didn't want to just expose his lies. No, I wanted to make him feel everything I had felt over the past few weeks. I wanted him to experience the kind of raw betrayal that can never truly be undone, the kind that breaks you down to your very core. If I was going to destroy the illusion of our marriage, I was going to do it in a way that made sure Rick understood the weight of what he had done. I would expose him for everything. He was a liar, a coward, a man who had destroyed the only life I'd ever known. I reached out to the private investigator. I told him I needed more. I needed him to follow Rick and Hannah more closely. I needed to know their schedules, where they were meeting, how often they were seeing each other. I needed every detail so I could plan my next move. The investigator assured me he would follow through. I wasn't concerned about the logistics of it. What mattered was the timing. I had decided that the moment I confronted Rick, it had to be public. It had to be so utterly humiliating that there would be no turning back. It wasn't enough for me to get the truth. I wanted Rick to feel the full force of the reality he had been avoiding. I wanted him to experience the shame of his actions in front of people who knew him, people who would see him for what he truly was. The next few days were a blur of planning, working, and more walking through the city. But with each step, I felt the tension building a quiet storm inside me, growing stronger with each passing moment. And then finally, I got the call. The investigator had found out where Rick and Hannah were meeting another hotel, another private rendezvous. They were set to meet at a luxury boutique hotel on the outskirts of the city, one that catered to high-profile clients, complete with a rooftop garden and sweeping views of the skyline. The perfect place for their secret affair, and more importantly, the perfect place for me to make my move. I didn't waste any time. I knew exactly what I had to do. I booked a room at the same hotel, making sure it was in a prime location, one where I could see everything but remain hidden. I didn't want to confront Rick immediately. No, I needed him to think everything was fine, that I was none the wiser. I needed him to let his guard down. So I kept things quiet. No accusations, no angry confrontations. Just silence. The night of the meeting arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black dress that fit perfectly its fabric, hugging my curves in all the right ways. I wanted to feel confident to own the moment, and I knew that the way I presented myself would be as much a part of the confrontation as the words I'd say. As I prepared, my hands shook slightly, but I steadied myself. This wasn't just about confronting Rick. It was about taking control of my life. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from me. I arrived at the hotel, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked in under a false name, a name I knew Rick wouldn't recognize, and made my way to my room. I watched from the window as Rick's car pulled up, and I could feel my pulse quicken. This was it. The moment of truth. I had to get this right. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Rick didn't know I was watching. He didn't know that I had orchestrated this entire encounter. I saw him enter the hotel lobby, his posture stiff, his face betraying none of the guilt that I knew he must be feeling. He walked with a purposeful stride, and I could almost feel the tension in his movements. I didn't have to wait long before I saw Hannah approach. She looked stunning, as always tall, elegant, dressed in a sleek red dress that clung to her body. The two of them exchanged a brief glance before they disappeared into the elevator together. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and I felt my stomach twist. This was the moment. This was the culmination of everything I had been planning for the past few days, and everything I had been feeling for weeks. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, it all came to a head in that moment. I wanted Rick to know that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything he had taken from me, the trust, the love, the security. It was about making him see the destruction he had caused. I moved quickly, my steps silent, as I left the room and made my way to the elevator. I had made sure to time it perfectly. I needed to be in the right place at the right time. When I reached the rooftop, I could see Rick and Hannah through the glass doors of the lounge area. They were seated at a table, their heads close, whispering to each other in hushed tones. I could feel my anger flare up again, but I controlled it. I had to. I waited for the perfect moment. I let them talk. Let them pretend they were safe. Let them believe they had everything under control. But I knew that soon everything would change. I stepped into the lounge, the soft click of my heels announcing my presence. Rick's head snapped up his face, going pale as soon as he saw me. Hannah turned her eyes widening with surprise, but there was no mistaking the shock that crossed her face when she saw me. For a moment, no one spoke. The world seemed to freeze in that brief instant. Rick opened his mouth, but no words came out. Hannah's hand clenched the glass of wine in front of her, but she didn't drink. I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. She hadn't expected me to be here, hadn't expected me to be watching, but I wasn't about to back down. Well, isn't this cozy? I said, my voice smooth calm, even though my insides were screaming. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Rick's face turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. He stammered, but the words didn't come. Cat. He started, but I cut him off. Don't. Just don't. I already know everything, Rick. All of it. My gaze shifted to Hannah. And you really thought you could sneak around behind my back, didn't you? You thought I wouldn't find out. Hannah's face fell, and for the first time I saw the cracks in her confidence. She had been playing a dangerous game, but now the truth was out in the open. Rick's eyes darted between me and Hannah, his mouth opening and closing, but still no words came. I could feel the satisfaction building inside me. This was it. I had waited long enough, planned long enough, and now I was here taking back what was mine. You both thought you could hide this from me. I said the words coming out with a cold, detached precision. But you were wrong. You'll never have what we had, Rick. You destroyed it, and now it's my turn. I turned to leave, but before I did, I looked back at Rick one last time. His eyes were wide, filled with guilt and fear, and I knew deep down that this moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. But for me, it was a beginning. the beginning of reclaiming everything he had stolen from me. As I walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air, I felt the weight of the past few weeks lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the woman who had been left in the dark, the one who had been too trusting, too naive. I had taken control. I had made him face the consequences of his actions, and in that moment, I knew nothing would ever break me again. The weeks that followed that confrontation felt surreal, like I was watching my life from a distance, observing it unfold as though it weren't really mine anymore. I'd always thought that confronting Rick would bring me closure, a sense of finality, but it didn't. There was no triumphant moment of satisfaction, no immediate sense of victory. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness that lingered, a void that seemed to stretch on endlessly, threatening to swallow me whole. The public humiliation I had planned for Rick was only the beginning. Yes, it had shaken him to his core, but it hadn't truly hurt him in the way I had imagined. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just wound the person who's betrayed, it infects everyone around them. And Rick's betrayal wasn't just an affair, it was a betrayal of the very essence of our life together. And now I was left holding the pieces. I hadn't expected the guilt to hit me. I thought I'd be angry, bitter, relieved, but instead I felt lost. The rage I had felt during the confrontation had burned hot and quick, but now there was only the cold aftermath. What had I really accomplished? I had exposed the affair. I had humiliated them, forced them to face the truth, but it didn't feel like enough. I wanted more. I needed more. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted justice. And justice wasn't just about making Rick squirm or making Hannah feel ashamed. It was about making them pay for what they had done to me, to my life, to the world I had built with my own hands. Rick had always been good at running damage control. He had a way of spinning things, of manipulating people to see things his way. In the aftermath of the confrontation, he went into overdrive. He tried to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but I didn't care anymore. Words meant nothing now. The lies he had told over the years could never be undone with a few carefully chosen apologies. No, I wanted something more. Something that would make him understand the full weight of his actions. I knew the only way to truly make him feel the pain he had caused me was to destroy the one thing he cared about the most, his image. Rick prided himself on being the perfect husband, the perfect businessman, the perfect everything. He had built his reputation on his charm, his ability to manipulate others into believing that he was this perfect, trustworthy man. But the truth was, he was a liar, a cheat, and a coward. And it was time for the world to see him for what he truly was. I started small at first. I began leaking information about his affair to our friends, to the people we knew in the business world, to anyone who would listen. I didn't care about their opinions. I didn't care about what they thought of me or my actions. What mattered was that Rick's carefully curated image was starting to crack. People were beginning to talk. Whispers spread through our social circles like wildfire. And with every whispered conversation, Rick's reputation began to erode. At first, Rick didn't react. He thought it was just a few rumors, nothing serious. But as the rumors grew louder, he started to panic. He began making frantic calls to people we both knew, trying to clean up the mess, trying to salvage his reputation. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Every time he picked up the phone, I could hear the strain in his voice. The confidence he once exuded was gone. He was unraveling, and I could see it. I could feel it. The more he tried to repair the damage, the more he seemed to dig himself into a deeper hole. People started to avoid him, pulling away from his carefully constructed world. They could see the cracks, and they didn't want to get caught up in the fallout. It was beautiful to watch this slow, agonizing destruction of the man who had once thought he was untouchable. But I wasn't finished. No, I was only getting started. As I watched Rick flounder, I realized that I needed to hit him where it would hurt the most, his career. Rick had always been proud of the work he did as a business consultant. He had worked hard to build his reputation in the industry, and his name was associated with success. But success was a fragile thing, and it could be destroyed with a single push. And I knew just how to make that push. I began digging into his business dealings, looking for cracks, looking for something, anything that would expose him for the fraud he truly was. I spent hours researching, going through old emails, contracts, anything I could find that might give me leverage. I wasn't going to stop until I found something that would bring him down. And then I found it. It was a small detail buried deep within a contract he had signed with a major client years ago, a clause that had been added quietly buried in the fine print that had allowed him to skim money from the deal to line his own pockets at the expense of his client. It wasn't illegal per se, but it was unethical, manipulative, and underhanded. It was exactly the kind of thing Rick would do, take advantage of people, use them to further his own success. And it was exactly what I needed. I took the contract to my lawyer, a sharp woman who had been a trusted advisor for years. She read through it carefully, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the gravity of what we had. It wasn't just a business deal gone wrong, it was a pattern of behavior, a habit of exploiting people for personal gain. And with that document, we had enough to destroy him. I knew it would take time, legal battles, public statements, all of the things that would force Rick to confront the consequences of his actions. But I was patient. I had time on my side. And I knew that the longer I waited, the more the pressure would build on him. His clients would start pulling away, his reputation would continue to crumble, and eventually his career would collapse under the weight of his lies. As the weeks passed, I watched Rick's world continue to unravel. He tried to keep his business afloat, tried to salvage what was left of his reputation, but the cracks were too deep. His clients started to drop him, and the ones who stuck around did so only because they had no choice. His credibility was shot. The man who had once prided himself on his ability to sell anything to manipulate anyone was now a shell of his former self. He had no one left to turn to. And then finally, the legal battle began. We filed a lawsuit citing breach of trust, unethical business practices, and fraud. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was the beginning of the end for Rick. I knew it would take time, but every step of the process was a step closer to making him face the full weight of his actions. I watched as Rick tried to fight back, tried to use every resource he had to counterattack. He hired high-powered lawyers, tried to discredit me, tried to paint me as the bitter, scorned wife. But it didn't work. The evidence was too damning, the truth too clear. I had been right all along. And in the end, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about making Rick see the destruction he had caused, not just to me, but to everyone who had trusted him, to everyone whose lives he had touched. The legal battle dragged on, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Rick would be forced to pay. And when that moment came, I would be ready. His reputation was in tatters, his career in ruins, and the life he had once taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had taken back control. I had made Rick face the consequences of his actions. I had made him pay for everything he had done to me and to everyone else. But even as I watched his life fall apart, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss. The man I had once loved was gone, and in his place was a broken shell, a man who had lost everything because of his own choices. It was a painful but necessary reminder that sometimes the only way to heal is to let go of what's holding you back. And Rick, for all his flaws and betrayals, had held me back for far too long. So I let go. And in that letting go, I found the freedom I had been searching for all along. The world was mine again, and this time I would rebuild it on my terms. The aftermath of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the confrontation, the legal battles, had left me feeling both empowered and empty. It was a strange contradiction, this mix of relief and exhaustion. I had won, hadn't I? I had exposed Rick for who he truly was, dismantled the life he had carefully built, and made him pay for his lies. The fallout from the legal battle had crushed him. His reputation was in ruins, his career shattered, and the world he had built on deception was falling apart. But why did it feel like I was the one who had lost something I spent the first few days after the legal victory in a haze, my thoughts swirling? I had imagined that confronting Rick, exposing his lies and making him pay, would bring me a sense of closure. But the reality was far from that. I had spent so much time focusing on the destruction of his life that I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost along the way. I had been consumed by the need for justice, by the desire to make him suffer the way I had. But in doing so, I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had forgotten to rebuild my own life, my own sense of self-worth. I sat in my apartment surrounded by the echoes of a life that no longer felt familiar. The walls that once seemed so comforting now felt cold and empty. The silence in the room was deafening. I realized with a painful clarity that I had been living for so long in the shadow of Rick's lies that I had forgotten what it was like to live for myself. It was as if I had been holding my breath for months, waiting for the moment when everything would be right again. But now that the moment had come, I realized that I had no idea what to do with it. The first thing I did was something small, something simple. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. It was a small act, but it felt like a step in the right direction. I hadn't been able to do anything for myself in so long. Everything had been about Rick, about his lies, about his betrayal. But now I had the space to breathe. I had the time to take care of myself, to do the things that I had once loved, the things that had made me who I was before all of this had started. I started by picking up a book I had been meaning to read for months, but hadn't had the time to. I hadn't read for pleasure in ages. It felt like such a simple thing, but it was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. I lost myself in the pages of the book, the words drawing me in and taking me to another world. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. The anger and bitterness that had been eating away at me for so long began to recede, replaced by something lighter, something I hadn't felt in months relief. But even as I felt the weight of everything lift off my shoulders, there was a part of me that still couldn't shake the feeling of loss. I had lost more than just my marriage. I had lost a part of myself. I had lost my trust in others, my ability to believe in the love I had once shared with Rick. I had lost my sense of security, my sense of peace. And no matter how much I tried to move forward, no matter how much I tried to rebuild, that loss lingered in the back of my mind. I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep focusing on what had been taken from me. It was time to take control of my future, to rebuild my life from the ground up. But that was easier said than done. How do you rebuild after something so devastating? How do you move forward when it feels like everything you once knew has been torn apart? I started small. I took long walks through the city, finding solace in the simple things, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees in the park, the sound of the birds chirping in the morning. It was strange how much beauty I had missed in the world while I had been so consumed by my own pain. It was as if I had been blind to it all, so focused on the destruction in front of me that I had failed to see the healing power of nature, of time, of simply being alive. I started doing the things I loved again. I went back to my work, diving into architectural designs with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, I felt inspired. I realized that my career had always been my anchor, the thing that had grounded me when everything else felt uncertain. I had put my passion for design on hold for so long, distracted by the chaos of my marriage. But now, I was able to focus on what mattered most to me, myself and my work. But even as I threw myself into work, I couldn't ignore the changes that had occurred within me. I was different now. I wasn't the same person who had married Rick. I wasn't the same person who had spent so many years trusting him, believing in him. I had been forced to confront the darkest parts of myself to see how much I had allowed his lies and manipulation to shape my life. But in doing so, I had discovered something powerful. I had discovered my own strength. I had discovered that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. The months that followed were a journey of self-discovery. I started to rebuild my life piece by piece. I began taking better care of myself mentally and physically. I started going to therapy, something I had always put off. I realized that I couldn't heal without facing the emotional wounds that had been left by Rick's betrayal. Therapy helped me untangle the years of hurt, of anger, and of self-doubt that had accumulated over time. It gave me the tools to move forward, to let go of the past, and to start building a future that was mine and mine alone. But the most important step in my healing process was forgiving myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for what had happened, questioning what I could have done differently, wondering if I had missed the signs, if I had somehow failed to be the wife Rick needed. But I had to realize that none of it was my fault. I wasn't responsible for his choices, for his betrayals. I was only responsible for my own actions, my own decisions. And I had chosen to fight for myself, to take control of my life, to rebuild from the wreckage of the past. As I continued to heal, I began to realize that the pain of the betrayal, while deep and overwhelming, had been a catalyst for growth. I had learned so much about myself, about my own strength, and about the kind of person I wanted to be. I had learned that I didn't need anyone else to define me. I didn't need Rick or anyone else to validate my worth. I was enough just as I was. And so I moved forward. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life. I started dating again, taking things one step at a time. I wasn't in a rush, but when I met someone who made me feel safe and valued, I allowed myself to open up again. I didn't expect perfection, but I allowed myself to trust again. And in doing so, I began to see that there was life beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. I learned to love myself again. I learned to trust my instincts, to trust my strength, and to trust that the future, though uncertain, could still hold beauty. I had been broken, yes, but I had been remade. And that was the greatest gift I could have given myself. Through it all, I had learned that while betrayal may tear us apart, it can also make us stronger. It can make us realize that the most important relationship we have is the one we have with ourselves. And once we learn to heal, to forgive, and to love ourselves, we can rebuild anything, even a life that we thought was lost forever. From everything I've experienced, I've learned that betrayal, no matter how deep or painful, doesn't define us. It's how we respond to it that shapes our future. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, but it's up to us to rise from the ashes. It's important to remember that healing isn't linear. You may feel lost, hurt, and broken at times, but with every step forward, no matter how small, you're rebuilding yourself, becoming stronger, more resilient. The key is to never lose sight of who you are and what you deserve. Always trust your instincts. Take the time you need to heal, and don't be afraid to ask for help when necessary. Surround yourself with the things and people that remind you of your worth, and when you're ready, allow yourself to move forward without guilt or regret. Sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most profound transformations. It's not about how you fall, but how you rise again. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. How have you dealt with moments of betrayal or heartbreak in your life? What lessons have you learned that helped you grow? Feel free to share your stories in the comments. Let's connect and support each other. If you found this story meaningful, please leave a like or share it with someone who might benefit from it. Thank you so much for reading and for being a part of this journey with me. Your support means more than words can express. Take care and remember, you are stronger than you think.